I would like to share 3 hopes and 3 concerns. And anyone who's seen me in spaces knows that they've probably heard some of this before because I don't hold back in the conversations that I have. But my hopes are that the sector has always understood coercive control. Because we work alongside women, we might not have called it that, but certainly when we've heard the experiences of women for decades, we've understood the pattern-based offence of domestic and family violence through the lens of what we now know coercive control to be. The reform agenda has been supported by our contributions to that conversation for probably a decade or so now. And there are tools and things in place that already allow the sector to be prepared for it. So the Queensland Domestic and Family Violence Common Risk and Safety Framework was developed by the voices and co-design of the sector back in 2016-17 and does contain a lot of that. So I'd say the sector is fairly well prepared. If we look back to one of the most foundational pieces that's available to us for the tools of the Power and Control Wheel, we know that that was developed by women and is an incredible tool that allows us to centre the language that women would use to describe the tactics. So my hope is that the sector's got this. The second hope is that there is a genuine opportunity to shift our systems to thinking about pattern base. And we have wanted that for a really long time, and this appears to be the tool, the vehicle to do that. We know that the sustained and significant impact coercive control can have on a victim survivor it's significant, and I'm hopeful that a sentence of 14 years reflects that, because that's what women tell us about what it takes to look like to heal and recover from this type of offence. Now, I don't actually think we're going to come anywhere near that maximum, but there's hope. You asked for hope. It's a hard one for me to do. And thirdly, I just wanted to acknowledge the dedication of the lives of family members who've lost loved ones, who've seriously dedicated their lives, their privacy, their stories to be able to contribute to the conversation in the media and the community. And I want to acknowledge the pride I have that Queensland has done that, and also acknowledge that that's taken significant toll on those families. And we are in a better place for having those conversations. But here are my concerns. I worry that as the sector and wider agencies, and when we talk about the system, we're all part of that system, but I am worried about the readiness of our system. I think that there is a false confidence and maybe a false sense of maturity of our system to respond to this. There's a real risk that our system steps ahead of women and leaves them behind. We've all got a responsibility to hold principles of consent and dignity first and foremost in our work, and I think that's a little bit missing from what I'm seeing at the moment. Women tell us when we do focus groups with them, and have told us for years, that if we plan a safety management plan without their voices and their views at centre, it will fail. But yet there is a confidence of the system in the name of protection to do things without their consent, without their voice, without their wisdom, and that worries me. I always say to my team, and they do get a little bit sick of me saying it, that when we receive a complaint from a participant, it's a really wonderful insight to their experience, but it also means they've got faith and hope that we would pay attention and listen to that complaint. And if you're not getting complaints, pay attention. Complaints are an incredible opportunity for us to pay attention, to dive deep, to understand, to learn, reflect. And yeah, whenever we get one, and that means we take a deep dive and do a bit of a reflection, I think the team do get sick of me saying that, but I genuinely am so grateful that those women feel that our service would listen and respond and contribute. And what we do in our systemic advocacy is take those voices forward as much as we can. No, all the time, not as much as we can, beyond what we can. The community awareness, second concern, the community awareness campaigns haven't sufficiently unpacked the societal and gendered aspects of coercive control, and we are seeing that right now. Take a deep dive into any Facebook feed, and you will see the misrepresentation and community understanding against women of this. You will see people using language of coercive control to describe workplace bullying or other things going on. The community hasn't got it because we didn't sufficiently focus on the societal or gendered aspects of coercive control. And I do worry that that will affect some of how our systems meet community expectations, because we miss the opportunity to communicate it well. It also means that there is widespread victim blaming and misunderstanding and criticising of women's responses are resistive or survival to their experiences of coercive control. I'm really worried about that. There's also a risk of systems abuse. So there's very real chance that our systems enable abuse. And what I mean by this is unless we've critically reflected on our responses, we may inadvertently be used as a tool of abuse. There is not one professional I know working in this space that wants to do that. The people that work in this space across any system are here for doing good, but we do need to be critical of how we can be used. Coercive control is so insidious. We hear that from women every single day, but it's not only the intense psychological impacts, it's the way in which it involves and includes community and system. Isolation works, manipulation works, threats and system responses being adverse only work because victim survivors believe it's possible. That's the scary part. So I am quite pragmatic and I will talk about my concerns first, but that's how I use the privilege that I have of being in the role that I have to take forward the voices that the team share with me on behalf of women to be able to do it. And it's thanks to all the partnerships and the expertise and wisdom in the room that I have the privilege of doing that on behalf of my team every day.
I'll draw on the findings from our study in terms of hopes and concerns. And I think a lot of it resonates with what Ria's just said, and I think strongly resonates with what all the tables have identified earlier on in the room. I think I want to start with, so that study captured the voices of over 1,000 victim survivors in Australia around their experiences of coercive control and their views on criminalisation at a time where Australia had, I guess, the peak kind of national conversations around New South Wales moving towards criminalisation. Queensland wasn't quite there yet, other states considering it. And victim survivors in the study overwhelmingly were in support of criminalisation. And I want to unpack that a little bit because I think there's been people who've run with that as the key finding from the study saying, see, victim survivors want a criminal offence. Victim survivors were asked whether coercive control in all its nuances should be a criminal behaviour. And I think anybody working in the sector recognises that if we ask a victim survivor to say, do you think domestic violence should be a crime? I think every victim survivor would agree. That doesn't necessarily mean that they want to access the criminal justice system to address these kind of behaviours. But for a long time, we say domestic violence is a crime, but really it isn't unless a range of behaviours meet other kind of offence characteristics. And this was an opportunity for victim survivors to be recognised that this domestic violence is more than physical violence and physical injury. We asked victim survivors about what they thought the benefits, or I guess the hopes were for a criminal offence or the criminalisation. And the greatest expectations or hopes or benefits were seen around the community understanding that domestic and family violence is not just physical violence. I think to a great extent, that's where we've made a lot of progress thanks to the national conversations that we've had over the last few years. We also asked victim survivors how they thought it will affect other areas, and victim survivor safety was the lowest rated, I guess, confidence in terms of do victim survivors expect that a criminal offence will increase victim survivor safety or victim survivors' access to justice. That was overall, when we broke it down by some of you have spoken about the different kind of cohorts, more marginalised cohorts of culturally, linguistically diverse women, First Nations women, LGBTIQ plus communities. All of them had that expectation or that hope that this will increase understanding, but all of them had lower hopes that this will actually increase victim survivor safety. And I think the thing that always stood out most for me is that First Nations women in the survey had the lowest confidence that this will increase their safety and their access to justice. So less than a third of the First Nation participants in the survey believed that a criminal offence would increase victim survivors' access to justice and victim survivor safety. And then I think in terms of, we've heard a lot of the concerns already, but the key concerns that victim survivors raised were around misidentification. And that was further unpacked. So in addition to the large survey, we then conducted over 170 interviews with victim survivors. And we had a lot of victim survivors who already had various experiences of misidentification in the context of having a strategic, highly skilled, coercively controlling partner who uses, at that point in time, the civil protection order system against victim survivors, which we know then also leads into a pathway of criminalization if there's further systems abuse to set the person most in need of protection up to breach a protection order that probably shouldn't have been put in place against her in the first place. I think in terms of some of the key area, or maybe it's just some of the other concerns. So I think perpetrator system abuse and manipulation was one of the key concerns. Fear of retaliation. So I think nothing that we don't already know around why victim survivors don't call the police, don't report, don't support criminal charges around domestic and family violence offending behavior in general. Lack of confidence that criminal charges will actually reduce risk and increase safety. And I think a huge concern around the sector being ready, but the police and court system not being ready. And concerns around how, as a victim survivor, you make sense to someone who needs to evidence this in a meaningful way, in terms of putting the many pieces of the puzzle that's coercive control together in a way that impacts the victim survivor's everyday sense of self, agency, perceptions of safety. But when you try to piece it together and make sense for someone else, victim survivors often said, I don't know how to make sense of this to someone else, let alone to someone in the context of law enforcement and court responses. I have many more notes, but maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
So thank you guys for having me here today. First, I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're standing on here in Mugginjin, so-called Brisbane. And I encourage everybody here, and I always do when I do an acknowledgement, to go and have a look at the Yuggera Mugginjin Elders Corporation, who do incredible work, and there are some great stories that they're about to release. So I always say that because, and it's relevant, you know why? Because you ask what my hope is, and my hope is for healing, and my hope is that people like my beautiful sister, who passed away 2 years ago, almost to the day, who was a victim to police brutality and spent a considerable amount of time in prison for domestic violence because of cross orders and because of a range of different things. She was not the perpetrator. She also worked for child safety for 18 years before she was homeless. So just to give you that's the start. I actually usually start with acknowledging my auntie Robbie Kiner, who I acknowledged last time. So the first time I've ever spoken about my lived experiences with this group, and I spoke about auntie Robbie Kiner, who was convicted and given a life sentence in 20 minutes, but then released because she was a victim of extreme brutality and violence that no one really gave a shit about. So when I think about hope, I'm holding the diary actually that Tamara wrote for me before she died about focusing on my breath and allowing it to guide my actions. And when I think about autonomy, and I sit here with Michael, you know, respectfully, you guys have been right at the centre of taking away my autonomy for a very, very, very long time. My first experience at the age of 9 when my nieces were being taken and you guys bashed me, that was kind of the beginning of it. And I never said bashed. I used to always say, oh, they just pulled me off my brother because they were flogging into him. And I'm like, no, they didn't flog me. But I'm like, I think my standards were a bit low then. Like they completely did that, right? So So that was sort of my introduction to the police force. My brother's in jail, he gets out tomorrow. So it's a continual cycle, and my oldest niece is now 28. So I've done a little bit of healing since then and a little bit of falling. But in amongst that, I've been really fortunate to have my 5 nieces be in my care and then my 5 grannies as well. And so I guess when I think about autonomy and I think about where I'm at now and I think about the fact that my children's father, who spent 3 years in prison for strangling me, and him being back in the picture and 14 months sober and blah, 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 and doing the things he's doing, I think about this coercive control stuff and I think about these conversations. I just think about how incredibly out of touch the police force are from start to finish with regards to what's going on with us. And I say that with respect. I do say that with respect because I do understand the nuances of systemic expectations, and I do understand the nuances and what sits behind the importance of having a system that is responsive to the community, being on the hospital board and doing some of those other things, you know. However, with that comes a greater deal of responsibility and ability to be able to look deeper than what's presented in front of you. And unfortunately, as was showed in the report that was released, that you guys are misogynistic, racist and homophobic. You're not best placed to deal with this stuff. You perpetuate it. You make it difficult for women. And I was surprised actually that you said 1 in 3 Aboriginal women said yes to it, because
more Aboriginal women said yes to it, but only 1 in 3 had felt that it has the capacity to increase.
Okay, because I would have thought it would have even been less. So at the moment, I'm really, and I have to say I am really lucky that I got to go and graduate uni and do all these things, right? Because my sister girls and my sister here that passed away, they didn't do that, yeah? I was really pushed and I was really lucky. I had these a few little people that kind of pulled me through, and, you know, and I'm a bit of a arsehole when it comes to persistence as well, because I just really I've got a really active brain. But why I say that is because there are so many other women in my community, and I'm really lucky that I'm currently documenting the experiences of 1,000 women across Queensland who have experienced domestic violence. So I'm right in the thick of that. I just did some interviews last week, particularly with one lady, you know, and I was with her when she went into the police station in Logan. That halfway through the interview, she had a hoodie on and she had her head down. She'd never been to the police station. She'd watched her older sister and me get flogged our whole lives and stuff. So it was a different generation. And so she finally went in on her own, and halfway through the interview, he went out and called the partner, let him know what she was doing, because there was she also got a DV against her 6 years prior to that, after he absolutely coercively controlled her and then made out like she was the victim, she was the perpetrator. Anyway, so she did that. He rang her, and then within an hour, that guy was driving past her house, revving a motorbike. About an hour later, I put a complaint in about that, and nothing came of that. That was about 4 months ago. I would love if you would go back to check that out, because I'm sick of not being heard, and I'm sick and tired of my women in my community not being heard. The number one thing for me with this, and in my consultancy business, the work that I do is to try and build organisations and build people and build capacity. I understand that this system is built on violence, and it is not built on building relationships. It is very different to the approach that we take as Aboriginal women when we gather and when we work together to raise our babies, and we, you know, make sure that our niece is in rehab, or we make sure that she's getting counselling for the terrible rape she endured from a family member growing up. You know, these things are the reality, and I sincerely hope that I'm not triggering anything for anybody in this room. And I just want to say, if I am, please do reach out to me. I have mechanisms of things that I do. I feel comfortable talking about it because I feel like you guys are the people that have this really unique opportunity to be able to speak. My dear sister Tamara had that opportunity, and her trauma could not move away from that trauma for whatever reason. I know that you can move away from your trauma. I'm still very traumatized. Okay, so don't worry. I have to go for a job next week that's like a really great big fat opportunity, and I'm in tears yesterday because how the hell can I do that? I'm mentally unwell. How the hell can I come be an executive for this big organisation? I'm just way too unwell, you know? But there is a way that you can find healing and safety, and it's not through this legislation. It's just not. It's just not. What our women need, and when my brother gets out tomorrow, my brother is a violent man and a perpetrator as well. And we were really, I'm also doing a research thing with Marcia Langton on Logan and drinking. And so she's been down and she's met with all the perps down there and whatnot. As a black man, you know, like we grew up with the same trauma and abuse and whatnot. You know, I want him to have some type of opportunity, not him per se. I want the fucking opportunity, to stop looking after him, please, in a sense. I want him to have autonomy. And I can't push him to do that, and you can't push him to do that, and you can't push him to do that, and no one in this room can push him to do that. But what we can do is we can create a society that's conducive with really strategic, thoughtful, informed ways of addressing an issue that is so incredibly complex that it must include the people who are most affected by it. And that's people like, you know, Tamara, and people like my dear Auntie Robbie Kiner, who are human beings first and foremost. And unfortunately, when I look at the QPS and the behaviour of the QPS, whether I look at the Human Rights Commission report and recommendations that they recently put out, and I'm just so, the continual belligerence to move in the direction of we are doing so great and let's get these guys and put them behind bars, it just really is so intellectually lazy that it hurts my heart. And I just think that we are so much smarter than that. So my hope is to dig into and to really think hard about how we can bring to life the human element of what this legislation actually means and what it will actually, what it will mean on the ground for these mob, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Karina. That, really speaks to a lot of the experiences that the young people that we work with at Brisbane Youth Service have. I think approximately 30% of our young people that we work with are First Nations, at homeless or at risk of homelessness, and almost all of them have experienced domestic violence either in their family of origin or in their intimate partner relationships. And it is no surprise that most of the young people that we work with are incredibly reticent to go to police. We've been working with a young woman for 18 months experiencing really high risk DV, and 18 months later she's finally, wanting to make her first police statement. I really hope she gets a good response. So, I really hear that experience. We do, a lot of the young women that we are working with and young people are still experiencing misidentification. Cross orders are present often. Our young people are not good victims. Their mental health is generally appalling. They've experienced terrible developmental trauma. Their substance use is usually very, very high, and they're discredited at the first hurdle, and are quickly kind of written off as unreliable witnesses. And particularly if they're substance affected at the time that they decide to go to police, which is often at that point of absolute crisis where things have gotten to a point where they can't see their way through and are reaching out in that desperate moment to try and seek a police response. But by and large, the young people that we work with don't and won't seek a police response. Look, I think coercive, criminalisation of coercive control, sound in principle, deeply problematic in application. Criminalisation, we know criminalisation is, it's not going to be the golden solution. It doesn't create change. It doesn't create rehabilitation. It can provide safety. But, if we're talking about criminalisation of young people, criminalisation of our First Nations young people, that it's a very short-sighted solution, which we know that already. I suspect that, not dissimilar to the criminalisation of non-lethal strangulation, even though it is a feature of nearly every single disclosure that we get from our young people, it is rarely, prosecuted. Very, very rarely prosecuted. So I worry that the civil process will be the go-to, and instead of a criminal process, and that will be for a whole lot of reasons, burden of proof and evidentiary requirements, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not a lawyer, so it's way, way above my pay grade. But I'm also really concerned that, obviously I work with young people, very low socioeconomic. They don't have private legal representation. So is this, will this be a charge for the rich? I think it'll be really interesting to track the data on where these charges and prosecutions actually eventuate. What else did I want to say? There's been so much said, so much incredible wisdom on this stage. Look, I think, for the young people that we work with who have experienced hardship in their growing up and a complete normalisation of violence, I think criminalisation of coercive control is important as a public education piece. Nearly all of the victim survivors and the young people using violence that we work with still would not identify coercive control as a feature of DV. They have a very restricted view of it being physical in nature only. So I think that is extremely important, but also recognising that if that is their normal experience, that that is really difficult. The only other thing that I really wanted to say, look, there's probably we haven't talked about it at length, and I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but the DfE workers' notes being legally admissible, I worry for our workforce. I worry that the workforce is already exhausted and overburdened and largely being held and run by women for women experiencing these issues. So I think that again, we want to be credible. We want our assessments and thoughts to hold weight in courts and police processes. But I also, we're all human and we're exhausted already. So thank you. I'll pass on to you, Michael.
Thanks, Teresa. Firstly, I'll say thank you to Karina for your words, and I'm sorry for what's happened to you and your family. I truly am. I'll also acknowledge the failings of the Queensland Police Service in our history that have come out through the Women's Safety Justice Task Force and the Commission of Inquiry. I feel that when those words come on, and I know you didn't direct them at me, but I have colleagues that have failed people. That was evident through the Commission of Inquiry, so we acknowledge that. In response to the actual question here, my hope is that we recognise that what the police component in regards to domestic and family violence is the tail end, the crisis end of a transactional piece, which goes across the life of the victim and that perpetrator and their families and their extended touch points. We're just one component of the response, and this criminal offence of coercive control is another lever in the toolbox to use when it's appropriate, at the right time and at the right concept. A criminal prosecution isn't going to solve every problem in a domestic violence setting. We've got to use all the tools available to us. We're just one end of that particular spectrum. You live in the other 90% of it. So when you're talking about victims having the courage or wanting to stand up to come forward, that's the autonomy, that's the self-determination on whether or not it's appropriate for them to use this mechanism to protect themselves. The other range is through the services and support that you provide. If it so comes into that legalistic framework, that's when we become involved, and that's where we need to establish our communications, our networks, our better strategies to assist that individual to understand what the system can and can't do, and whether it fits their particular safety arrangement.
I think that's really scary to think that right at the end you're jumping in. That's scary. Do you know what I mean? No, you're part of it from start.
I agree. We're in it from the start.
You need to be part of it from the very beginning.
And that's that high-risk team component where participatory, we're here to be used, and I'll say used, when the victim has that desire or need for that particular trigger or lever.
So that's one part to it, Then the other part is your autonomy and your ability to come from the other side, So you meet them in those spaces, and the absolute, like, inextricable, like if you're doing 10% of the work and getting 98% of the money, and these guys are walking around with a $2 paycheck, and doing all the hard work that's needed to be done, that's problematic. And the other part to this, I think, is that once it gets to you guys have your own, you guys have been, told that you guys are misogynistic, homophobic and racist. So please make a decision on Karina Hogan yelling out the front of her house because a cop has just walked in looking down on her. Please make a decision on her. She just called me a dog. Oh, I think I know what I'll do. I'll arrest her. And that's happened to me. So my children were stuck in a house with their abusive father, the one that strangled me, went to prison for 3 years. I broke into the house to get my children. They came along. I said, please, can I call my psychotherapist, my psychiatrist, because I feel like I'm having an episode. And then the woman came in and said, no, we're arresting you. Held the camera into my face and took me away and left my children with the perpetrator while he was off his head. That type of behaviour happens when you think you sit in just one part of it. You don't just sit in one part of it, Michael. You've got to be able to embed yourself in some regard. If you're doing that stuff at the very end and you're making that decision to take someone's autonomy away, whether it be arrest or whatever, and in some cases you've got to. My brother's an absolute piece of shit sometimes, yes. So sometimes you have to, right? But if you're only jumping in at that end of that part of it and exonerating yourself from the rest of it, it just, to me, doesn't make sense. But it is very indicative of police. They do that. They categorise things, they put, and that's the system, right? So that's what we've got to sort of try and,
And
I think.
I want to say we're 10% of it. The concept there, as I'm saying, that's our play in regards to criminal prosecutions or protection order applications. They're the only tools we have. And what we don't want to be doing in the work that you're doing is breaching over into that autonomy or self-determination of the individual that's suffering. We're there when we need to be called upon, and we're part of the box that has the tools, all of the tools that are required. And when I mean the other 90%, I'm talking about yourselves doing the social services support providers, Department of Housing, crisis accommodation, employment categories, education categories, the entire box, and which is the solution, the entirety of the box. What I'm trying to get across was we don't want to be jumping in early, and your examples and your lived experience are there. We understand. That's what I'm trying to say, is we don't want to be jumping in.
There's different ways to jump in, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, we don't want to be jumping in right at the front and steamrolling straight across a victim just because they've walked into one of your agencies, and then we take control. We would much prefer that individual to be stabilised, receiving the correct supports, and when they think that the criminal justice system can be engaged, if that's appropriate for them, bang.
I am, and I want to. I don't want to divert the conversation, but I do want to say a few observations about what we're talking about. I think it's really interesting that we consider we're not necessarily reflecting that justice and safety are actually at opposite ends of a continuum. And with respect to police's 100-day review, I do want to acknowledge the really important part that police play in sending messages of accountability to a perpetrator without those tools you just spoke about. And I think the task force and the inquiry and the way that we receive thousands of police referrals suggest to me that there's a really important part that you play in prevention by sending a message the minute you show up at that scene. I think it's really interesting how the whole system has tied itself up in knots to reform by making little special opportunities and pathways available, but yet those pathways are not safe for victim survivors to walk through without one of us walking beside them. And yet we have not been funded to do that. A system has not sufficiently reformed itself if it requires an advocate to walk alongside. We don't, oh gosh, so many things to say. When you spoke about, the good work of police officers, but we also speak about the few rotten eggs that we always hear. The good work of the police officers that I see happening on the ground, from those new constables coming through, the training opportunities, the way in which we are engaging with victim survivors' voice, I worry that police are lost in a view that they need to be victim-centric and trauma-informed in their response to victim survivors. Probably the best response I could imagine a police providing that's trauma-informed is actually focusing on the perpetrator and doing what you're recruited, trained, advertised to do. That's why those officers are there, and we really need that. Police evidence is so often what's required for the rest of the system to work. Housing, VAQ, health, you are so important. It breaks our heart to see a report that suggests that DV is not core business. It's everyone in the society's core business. It's such an invasive social issue that will affect generations to come if we don't get right. It's behind every other policing issue. So there's such hope that I have for the investment that's happened and the reform that's happened in Queensland, and I really worry that we're so focused on lethality that we don't talk about the good stuff, and there's like this fear to be able to celebrate because everyone's so worried that it's not good enough or it's not right. But it is so hard to avoid mistakes, like just generally in society and parenting in life. It's so much easier to replicate what works, and we don't talk about what works. And what works is this room, what works is the advocacy, what works is the friends and family and people that are not paid going to a police station with somebody and then continuing to speak somebody's story in every space we possibly can. We have the tools, we have the conversations, we have the people. I wonder what it would take to be courageous about owning our truth, about what's really going on, because we're not going to solve it if we keep not going there. I don't know if that collection of thoughts made any sense, but that's me. Yeah. Oh, okay.
I do want to unpack that a little bit more about telling people stories and what it takes to actually do the sense making.
Yep.
Tell someone's story in a way that makes sense and that is understandable in the context of the legislation. So,
can I, with permission, can I flip the question?
Yes,
I think we've come so far with reform that we're telling people stories on their behalf. There is not one service that's sufficiently funded to go on someone's journey from go to end. If we believe that the only way for somebody to receive justice, access justice, is with an advocate beside us, we've got it wrong to begin with. We need to reorientate everything to consent and dignity. The Queensland's preconception with protection and doing on behalf of and safety and high risk, and it's worrying, it's problematic, and it does not respect the voices of the thousands of people we're all working with every year. It is going to take significant, courageous reform, and I worry that we're just tinkering around the edges. We're just shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic constantly. We don't stay with long enough to demonstrate the long-term outcomes to do it. So when it comes to respecting and collecting our thoughts in a way that's going to help the process, I think we need to reorientate to how we give people back their stories. Rather than passing it between ourselves, what would it look like to give people back their stories? And the biggest call to action on that, and the biggest missing piece in Queensland, is perpetrators. How do we collect our thoughts about the pattern of behaviour we've seen perpetrated and stick it to their journey? Make it their story. It's so often we're not placing it where it belongs, and it permits the whole system to constantly just tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak. No, we need to get brave and courageous and start calling out those that are choosing to cause harm.
I mean, I think yes to everything Ria's just said, and that focus. And I think it's the consistent or persistent issue that everything is geared towards victim survivors in terms of not support mechanisms, but in terms of responsibility of managing their own safety, of managing the system, of somehow managing the behavior of the person that chooses to use violence. So I completely agree there's a massive piece of work to be done in terms of the perpetrator or the men who use violence intervention space and the accountability. And I can't remember who it said earlier, but that kind of key message of accountability that is not about policing and criminalization, but about sending a very clear message of accountability when someone shows up. Whether that's, whether it's initiated by the victim survivor, whether it's initiated by a manipulative perpetrator who knows how to use the system, or by a third party that calls the police. I've got a couple of other things that I would like to jump back to. Can I? Okay. I think one of the other things Michael said earlier in terms of, leaving it up, giving the agency back to a victim survivor, leaving it up to them whether they want to engage with police or the criminal justice system. I think one of the dangers there is when we talk about coercive control, we talk about so much that is systems abuse, and where the person using violence forces the victim survivor to be in contact with the criminal justice system. So I think of the many victim survivors in our study that told their stories of being set up to be misidentified and being set up to have contact with police that they didn't choose, or that they wouldn't have called on, and they wouldn't have needed to call on if it wasn't for the perpetrator's behavior in the first place. So I think there's elements of coercive control where it's not just about a victim survivor recognizing their experience, engaging with a DV specialist service, making sense of their story, and then making a decision of what's the right kind of pathway in terms of justice, in terms of healing that Karina spoke about. But I think there's many points for victim survivors where the victim survivor becomes involuntarily involved with the justice system, and where it's important for police as the frontline response to recognize and respond to that, and not just say, we're not coming back until the end, because I think, unfortunately, you're being forced into situations where the victim survivor is not the one choosing to have that contact in the first place, let alone whether or not she wants to go down a pathway of criminal justice involvement. I think the other thing I wanted to pick up is something Lou said earlier in terms of, I think you said, is this a system or a legislation that's designed for the rich? I think I think it's interesting because we know that so much of our legislations work for white, middle class, able-bodied women, straight, cisgender. Are designed, like if they work at all, yes, they're designed for that victim survivor cohort. I think in our study, what really came through is that we had a really large proportion of highly educated, initially financially stable women with strong career pathways, who ended up sleeping in cars, couch surfing with friends, homeless, in poverty, without their children, because they have a middle or higher socioeconomic status perpetrator who knows how to use the system. So I think when we talk about coercive control, I'm not even convinced that this legislation is working for the middle class, white, cisgender woman, because there's a good chance that she has a highly skilled middle to upper class perpetrator who has the financial resources and the skills and the knowledge and the articulation to drag her through a system and essentially ruin her.
I was just going to extend on that, Silky. So, for a criminal proceeding for one of our young people to see that through, given that it's going to be lengthy, they need to be reliably contactable. They need to have a residence. like straight up, transient, in crisis, phone's been destroyed 5 times, new numbers, you're out at the first hurdle. That's, you know, and I worry that this is going to be inaccessible for, you know, as a response for, you know, the average young person that we work with. That was all I had.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I just wanted to say I'm not even sure it's accessible for the ones where we usually think
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I, you know, and I think, you know, given the evidentiary proof, you know, the civil process will be the go-to unless, you know, there is a, you know, a well supported, wealthy, proactive victim survivor in the picture. And of course, we don't begrudge that outcome, but you know, it will be really interesting to see what the practical impact of this legislation is.
Okay, so I wanted to give everybody hope. We're embedded in 10 police stations, and what I have seen is a great enthusiasm for the good ones to investigate. What I can say is what I've seen is because police are investigating coercive control, they're looking at a pattern, and I've seen them do other criminal charges. So there is a hope and a shift that's happening in what I said about the pattern. That's what I've seen on the ground. My other thing is, I think there's often a misconception that we have vicarious trauma when people have the courage to share stories in safe places. And that's not what the vicarious trauma of our workforce, our specialised workforce, is about. It's about the way in which we anticipate, hope and do our absolute best advocacy, and systems fail or our advocacy fails. And what I would say with that really humbling bio that you gave before is, of my time in this space, the thing that works is trust, collaboration and relationships. Above all of that, when you build enough trust and relationship that you can have a tough conversation with somebody who's sitting potentially opposingly in a conversation, there is hope for me in that. And that is our job. That is our job. That's how we're going to survive getting through all of this and all of this work, is to think that if we can mitigate the vicarious trauma all of our workforces are feeling, it's in collaboration. And if agencies or systems continue to do it in silos, you're never getting out of that hole. So the collaboration is the key, and it's messy and it's hard and it takes resources and time. And I think this panel is a perfect demonstration of how little ways that happens. But the more we can actually give space and freedom for our practitioners to join in collaboration, networking and understanding systems, the better chance we have of avoiding and maintaining our workforce. Because it's not the stories that give us the trauma. The vicarious resilience we get from stories is what keeps us doing the job. It's that we get disappointed because we think something's possible and it doesn't happen. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley.
And just off the back of your little comment before your last thing, I do have some concerns about services being within police stations. I've had a negative experience before, but I'm pretty sure you guys would be across that. But it can be great too. It can be great too. It's worked positively for me and it's worked negatively for me. But that was, you know, desktop lottery, whatever you call it. Yeah. So what's my final thing that I would leave, and my final hope? Well, I think I want to say that within our community, within the First Nations community, I'm really so lucky. I've had almost 40 years of being really closely tied with my community. And knowing where I'm from, you know, and having a really strong black mother and 2 black aunties that raised me. What is my hope now? See how I go. I talk too much. Oh, my hope is, right, that because I believe in systems change and I see strategically that working. I've seen that strategically work in systems that have worked across and just from seeing and being part of other whatever things. And so what I'm saying is that we're a bright bunch of people and we're really smart and we're really resilient as a community. The women are really deadly, like we're really strong. And we have a really uncanny ability to come together and make things happen. Like it wasn't just random that we raised 10 foster kids, me and my mum and my 2 sisters, right? Like I was like, yeah, we just do it. And then when I stood back, I was like, no, that is the biggest strategic plan I've ever seen in my life, Louise. That's my mother. You know, like this little cute black woman from Woodridge who just takes in all the kids. No, she's actually the most strategic, intelligent, unbelievably incredible, amazing woman. And then looking at our community-controlled health services. So fortunate I get to sit on the board of the Aboriginal Medical Service as well, and have done so and chaired it, since 2015. But I speak about that because my hope is that those services will start seeing the fruits of the money that is just absolutely poured into policing, and that we know that, like you said, you're just one little part of the picture. So my hope is that that you guys understand that us guys, we want a solution beyond the conflict. And there is a really big distrust for you guys. I always say trust moves at the rate of a relationship. Is that the saying, I think? So the more you invest in that, the more that it can grow and be better. But when you're faced with a barrier or, sitting on a stage with a woman who looks you in the eye and says, your mob did this to me, think about it. Sit and think about it and then go, she's actually not just saying that because she wants to get a rise out of me or she wants to, sometimes people do, but whatever. She actually really does give a shit. And there are so many other Aboriginal women out there that really do give a shit. And hopefully my sister-in-law won't go to prison when she gets done for her coercive control charge that she's got against my brother, who's in jail for holding a knife to her throat. Figure that one out. But yeah, that's my hope. And I just want to say thank you too to you guys. Sorry, can I just say that without being wanky? So thank you to BYS. Thank you to BYS because you look after my niece who lost her baby and you guys gave her a funeral. So thank you for that because she got taken back into custody. We got to get her remains and we got to bury those remains. Thank you so much for that. That was last January. Mayora was the baby's name. Thank you for giving my family a place to stay when they needed somewhere to stay when we were fucked up. So thank you for that. And Silky, you're just deadly. I love you. Thank you for being deadly. Sorry. I talk too much, sorry.
Just probably trying to tie a thread between Silky, Karina and Ria on some of the, one particular comment about the systems. And 100% agree with Ria. It's systems are the tools on attempting to achieve something. I 100% agree in the relationship concept. The saying of it's the nuts behind the wheel. The vehicle is the mechanics that we put together. It's the when I say the nuts, it's the people behind it who are steering those vehicles. Oh no, I was actually trying to refer to us. It's the driver, and if the driver's in town and pointing that vehicle in the right direction with the passengers, or we share the driving load because it's a long journey, and that's what I'm trying to link with Ria.
Could she be the driver?
Anyone can drive.
Yeah.
But as long as we're all in the same vehicle and pointing it in the right direction, it's not the systems. We're using that to get somewhere, but we're all in the same car. That's why I try to refer with the nuts behind the wheel. We might take some turns and go in the wrong direction, and that's when you need to kick us out of the driver's seat, take over and show us the way. That's how we make the progress. And in regards to other things, from a policing perspective, and I'm going on the sexist, misogynistic, or racist. The concept there of the BCTI you mentioned, we're having to train that to officers because we recognise that when we turn up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and my comment in regards to our involvement and autonomy was directed at yourselves when you see those people coming to you, empower them, develop that rapport, put them in the car, and when you need us to drive, let us know, we jump into the driver's seat. But our need to invest in BCTI education with our staff is that's what we've lacked in the past when we've turned up to scenes 2 o'clock in the morning because a neighbour's called. We have to be empathetic to identify the person most in need of that particular protection. But the concept of 100% agree, we're the blunt instrument in regards to perpetrator accountability when that criminal justice system needs to be activated. My comment in regards to autonomy is when you see the people walking in your doors who have either had a bad response from police or you've never seen us before, you're the ones that have that opportunity to develop the rapport, help them provide something with the feet on the ground and take a breath, as this morning. And then when they're ready, they can use that particular resource. Or if we're already engaged and we've done it wrong, and I appreciate these might only be words to you, Karina. We are looking to see where we can correct our errors, and I appreciate we're only at the beginning of it, and we're doing things particularly with gendered-centred reviews. The moment a female is identified in a protection order application as the respondent, i.e. the perpetrator, it's a requirement for us to review that action to see if it should be corrected. And our statistics internally, whilst they're not formalised through our research components, they have come down. And when I watch the justice system domestic violence statistics regularly, and that has taken a dip. So it's your influences that are creating our behaviours and influencing the larger system. And I think even as yesterday, when we're talking to families with New South Wales, the percentage of females nominated in a domestic violence order was down to about 9%.
At the risk of taking us off track, I'd be really interested, and I'm sure many other people in the room would be really interested to see those stats, just like New South Wales has the opportunity to share those stats.
So those justice statistics are online, and I think they're updated weekly.
Sadly, there was a question on notice in May that said 30% from a court's perspective. So I think we've got some work to do.
Yeah.
There was a question on notice that was published in May, and I believe, no, Michael's holding the mic for me. So I've been angling for this the whole time. Michael's holding my mic. 30% is what that data said. And to tell you the truth, I don't know where it comes from, but to my point earlier, we need to get courageous about looking at what the data says. It seems to me that we can create any story based on data pulled from anywhere, and maybe we need to do that together a bit more, because I think that when it's done together, there's an accountability for systems that we need to have.
Okay. I try very, very hard not to use Queensland Police Service statistics for the purpose of...
I'm going to ask Silky and Lou to very quickly say one last thing, because we are definitely over time.
Okay, I'm going to try and sneak in two though. I think building on what others have already said, I think really reminding ourselves that the criminal justice response is a tiny piece of the puzzle in responding to coercive control, responding to domestic and family violence, responding to the support needs of victim survivors and the accountability of people using violence. We know that many victim survivors never report to police, and even of those who do, a large proportion will never further engage with the criminal justice system. So I think we talk about international jurisdictions that have used this, and depending on the statistics that you look at, that may look better or not so good. But when we look at the overseas statistics of what's reported as coercive control to police in England and Wales, for example, 2% end up in a conviction for coercive control. So, there's a tiny fraction of the experiences that even make it to the police, let alone of the experiences that overall are lived experience in everyday life of victim survivors. And I think that really highlights and emphasizing what Ria has said, the need for service collaboration, integration, and I think with that comes the recognition of resourcing for the wider sector. Like, I think we have a lot of conversations and focus on upskilling the police, upskilling the criminal justice system, and yes, rightfully so, we need to invest in that space because we have a lot of concerns in that space. But it's the domestic and family violence and sexual violence specialist services that carry this kind of work every day prior to the introduction of this legislation and ongoingly so. And we don't have the resourcing for the sector to carry that work and to constantly educate everyone around them, to bring everyone along on the journey. And the second thing I'm going to sneak in now is just to wrap this up. I think following on from what Karina said earlier, I think there's a lot to learn from the First Nations space. And if more of these conversations and the work and the reform work were driven by First Nations elders, advocates, community-controlled organisations, they be working for everyone. Like, I genuinely believe that for the work I've done with First Nations communities in the DV space, the family violence space more broadly, child protection space, if we get it right for First Nations community and families, we'll get it right for everyone. And there's a lot of wisdom and expertise and knowledge and skills and pilots in that space that we could learn a lot from and translate that into our responses to coercive control more broadly.
I'm going to keep mine extremely brief, and that is only to say that I think one day of dedicated training for police on coercive control, I think everyone in this room would agree is grossly inadequate. We are setting police up to get it wrong right from the get-go if that is how the force is being resourced to understand something that is nuanced, complex, easy to manipulate, and can involve a whole lot of systems abuse. So that's it.
Well done. Can everyone please give our panel a huge round?
I never said thank you to Michael, and I don't want to be rude. I do want to say thank you because I've never said thank you to a police officer like this, Jesus. But no, I do just want to say thank you just because it does take courage to be in a room like this, and we need you. I hate saying that, but we do. We need you. Sometimes I hate saying that, but we do. We need you. Sorry. I'm sorry to end it on me. You say something now.
No, I do appreciate the pain that it must have taken you to say that. I do. I'm not trying to be facetious on it. I listened, and I struggle with the fact that I know I've got colleagues that don't do the job right. I know that, and I don't agree with it, and I spend my days rallying against it. So thank you. But I will say it's more than one day for our coercive control training.
I stand corrected.
That's only on the offence. Since even the last 3 years, every general duties officer has had to undertake 6 days of training, and the vast majority of that has been on coercive control. Coercive control as a concept has been in the DV legislation for us since 2012. So our training's always been there. This one day was just about the legislation, just that one section.
Okay, well, let's hope that you can take some of the stories and feelings and emphasis that you've heard today back into your workplace. I would love to do a lovely long wrap up of all of the things that I've heard, but I think the one thing that I would say is we've talked a lot about the system and systems today. We've talked a lot about sort of a siloed approach, so the system being the police over here and the services over here. I really want to invite us all to think about the connections between them and the ways that working better together is going to actually help the people that we're here to work for. So one last round of applause, and we'll look forward to